So the question is it necessary for ātma-vicāra also to purify the nadis and unite them and enter the central channel to enter into samadhi? P.S. Those yogic practices are not mental. We use them as concrete practices to achieve that, to achieve samadhi.
Let's go back to the basics. What is yoga about? The aim of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. As that is in the right at the beginning of the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali says, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. So all the practices of yoga are aimed at chitta vritti nirodha. Chitta vritti means mental activity. Nirodha means the curbing mental activity. In other words, stopping mental activity. That is the aim of yoga. And the state in which the mental activities have ceased is what is called samadhi. All the practices of yoga and all the philosophy about this nada and pingala and this different nadis and all these things, these are all connected with this aim of trying to stop the mental activity in order to be in samadhi. But Bhagavan says merely stopping mental activity is not an adequate aim in itself. Every night when we fall asleep, all mental activity ceases because we're too tired to continue attending to other things. We stop attending to other things, and so we subside in sleep. But sleep is just a state of mano-leya. Mano-leya means a temporary dissolution of mind. So as Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadeshundya, but dissolution of mind is of two kinds, leya and nasa. What is subsided, what is dissolved in leya will rise again. If its form dies in nasa, it will not rise again. So our aim is mano nasa, not mano leya. Bhagavan said, samadhi achieved by the yogis is mano leya. It is a temporary dissolution of mind. And that is not a useful aim in itself. To illustrate this, Bhagavan used to tell the story about a yogi on the banks of the Ganga. That yogi was extremely adept in his practices of yoga. He was so adept, he was often going into Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi for prolonged periods of time. And he could remain in that state for sometimes for days on end. And because of that, because people saw him always sitting there absorbed in samadhi, the local villagers worshipped him. And someone had come as one other sadhu had come and was acting as his disciple. So once when that yogi woke up from his Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he was feeling thirsty. So he asked his disciple to fetch water from a nearby Ganga. So the disciple went to the Ganga to fetch water, but by the time he had returned, the yogi had gone back into samadhi. And this time he had gone into samadhi so deeply that he didn't wake up for 300 years. When Bhagavan told this story, he embellished it, and he said, in those 300 years, the Ganga had actually changed course. Now the Ganga was several miles away. Because when going over the floodplain, sometimes the rivers change course. So during the course of that 300 years, the Ganga had actually changed course. So it was now several miles away. Because the Ganga had moved, the village also moved. And so where the yogi was on the outskirts of a village, was by that time, after 300 years, it was in a dense jungle. But when the yogi woke up, the first thing he did was he angrily asked, "Where's my water?" What Bhagavan used to tell this story, his comment upon this story was, the most superficial, the last thought was in his mind, before he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, was the first thought that popped up when he woke up. That means even the most superficial thought in the mind was not destroyed, in spite of remaining for 300 years in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. When even most superficial thought is not destroyed, What about all the vasanas, the seeds that give rise to thoughts? So remaining in nirvikalpa samadhi is not useful. It is just it's just like if you're traveling on a train somewhere, if you get off at a station because you think it's a nice scenery and you stay at that place for some time, it's fine, but you're not making any progress. You're not going to reach your destination until you get back in the train and continue your journey. So according to Bhagavan, going into nirvikalpa samadhi is of no spiritual benefit at all, because in nirvikalpa samadhi is just a state of manolaya. It does not bring about manonasa. That is why Bhagavan in Nana, in the 8th paragraph, when he talks about pranayama, he says, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will remain subsided. And when the prana comes out, the mind will also come out and wander under the sway of its vasanas. Therefore, pranayama is not, he concludes that paragraph by saying, therefore, pranayama is an aid to restrain the mind, but it is not, will not bring about manonasa. So our aim is manonasa. Manonasa can be brought about only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. So in Upadesh Undya, Bhagavan deals with the path of yoga in 5 verses, verses 11 to 15. 15 is about the conclusion, so that's not directly connected with the path. That is the final result. What Bhagavan says there is, in the first 2 of those 4 verses, verses 11 and 12, he says that restraining the breath is a means to restrain the mind, like a bird caught in a net. And why? Because the prana and the mind have they are like 2 branches of a single tree. They share a common root. So the mula shakti, that appears as this, the mind is a knowing power, jnana shakti. The breath is kriya shakti, a doing power. But the root power is one. So when you control one, you control the other. If you control the mind, if you subdue the mind, the breath will be subdued. If you subdue the breath, the mind will also be subdued. But by subduing the breath, all you bring about is Leia. So Bhagavan says in the verse 13, dissolution of mind is of 2 kinds, Leia and Nasa. What is in Leia will rise again. What is in Nasa, if its form dies in Nasa, it will not rise again. Then in the next verse, verse 14, he says, if the mind, which will subside by restraint of the breath, only if that mind is sent on the orvari, will its form die. What does he mean by orvari? Orvari, superficially, it seems to mean one path. Vari means path, or means one. But or has another meaning. Or is a verb, but means to investigate and to know. So orvari can also mean orumvari. Orumvari means the path of investigation. So that is what Bhagavan actually means there. Only simply controlling the breath will bring about manolaya. Once we're in manolaya, we obviously can't do anything because it's a state like sleep. It's a state of complete dissolution of mind. So we can't make any effort in manolaya. So before we go into manolaya, if the yogi, before the yogi goes into manolaya, if he sends his mind on the investigating path, in other words, if he turns his mind back within to investigate who am I, then only will the mind die. So this yoga is not a complete path in itself, but merely by yoga we cannot annihilate the mind. We cannot bring about manonasa by yoga. So yoga can enable us to calm down the mind, to keep the mind in a calm and clear state. Then before we subside in manolaya, we need to turn the attention back within to attend to ourselves. So regarding this nada and pingala and all these nadis and chakras and everything, I can tell a story which Suri Nagama wrote, and it was, I think she wrote it in Telugu. It's not in any of her books as far as I'm aware, but it was, it must have been in something she wrote to her brother, and it was translated into English, and it appeared as a filler in the Mountain Path about 45 years ago. I remember reading it. That is what Suri Nagama wrote, is once some learned pundits came, and they were very learned in yoga sastras. So for several days, they were talking with Bhagavan, all about this nada, this nada pingala, these nadis, the shushumna, all these things. Suri Nagama was listening to all this, but she couldn't make head or tail because she didn't know about all these yoga things. So she was feeling a bit dejected, but she couldn't understand all these things. After these learned people had left, and she asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, you were talking with these people all about these things that I couldn't understand. Can you explain all this to me? Bhagavan said, why should you want to know about all these things? No, but Bhagavan, you were talking about these things with them, so it must be something important. Bhagavan said, because they were asking me, I was answering, but that is what they came to me to know, so I talked to them about this. But this is not necessary. Then she said, well, isn't it, surely it's good. Yoga is a great thing. Surely shouldn't I know all this? You were talking about nadis and shushumna and all these different things. So wouldn't it be good if I know all these things? Bhagavan said, why should you know about all these things? This is all manokarpana. It's all a mental fabrication. It's all an imagination. And she said, what? All these things that the yogis talk about, it's all an imagination. Bhagavan said, yes, when even the body itself is an imagination, body itself is a manokarpana, what will all these things be? So that shows what is Bhagavan's real attitude towards these things. All these things are okay for people who are attracted to these things. But if we want to go deeper, we must leave behind all these yoga practices and come to this path of this Orvari, the investigating path. Because it's only by investigating ourselves that we can know ourselves as we actually are. And since ego is a wrong awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, ego can be destroyed only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. This is what is meant in the Advaita Sastras when they say the problem is avidya, and avidya can be removed only by vidya. The avidya they're talking about is ego. That ego itself, as Bhagavan said, is mula avidya. Because ego is the false awareness, I am this body. So that is the ignorance that is to be removed. That ignorance can be removed only by vidya. What vidya will remove that avidya? Since the avidya is awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, being aware of ourselves as we actually are alone is the vidya that will remove it. So the aim of Bhagavan's path is to know ourselves as we actually are. To know ourselves as we actually are, we don't need any yoga practices. All we need is to turn our mind within to see who am I. So Bhagavan's path is a much simpler and a more direct path. As Bhagavan said about this chitta-vritti nirodha, he said that is not practical, because merely bringing about chitta-vritti nirodha will result in Leia. It's only a temporary state. What we want is, we want to be permanently free of the problem. The root of the problem is our rising as ego. So we need to put an end to this ego. We can put an end to this ego only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. So with all due respect to all yogis, Bhagavan was, when any yogis came to Bhagavan, if they were open to it, he would turn them towards his path. Some of them were not open to it. They only wanted to know about their own path. So like those learned people Suri Nagama was talking about, they were only interested in yoga. So Bhagavan talked to them only about yoga. So Bhagavan treats everyone at their own level. But Bhagavan did say, incidentally, about this, everything that is achieved by yoga is also achieved by this ātma-vicāra. That is, yoga is trying to withdraw the prana along the Sushumna Nadi up to the Sahasrara. But Bhagavan said that is not the end. It has to come down and merge in the heart. All this is achieved by ātma-vicāra without knowing anything about this yoga. So ātma-vicāra fulfills the purpose of yoga, but goes beyond. Because yoga talks only about the Sahasrara and breaking out of the Sahasrara, Kapala Bheda. That is not the aim in ātma-vicāra. The aim is to know and to be what we actually are. To know and to be what we actually are, we don't need any of these yoga practices. All we need is to turn the mind within and to merge back into the source.